Well, it happened. This is going to be a quick TLDR of what exactly happened, why it's important. If you think I missed any important points or think I may have missed with some of my points, just let me know in the comments. So, big thing is, first off, Overwatch League is probably not coming back next season. A big announcement, we'll be talking about that in a few seconds. But before we get into that, heart goes out to the employees of Overwatch League staff within the Overwatch League, the Overwatch League teams. Especially finding out last notice, I saw in a couple of them that even within the Overwatch League staff, they were finding out on Twitter at the same time as the rest of the public. They weren't even notified ahead of time, and that's just really, really crappy. It's a fitting way for the league to end with that level of miscommunication and mismanagement, but you hate to see it regardless. So, quick little story. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the story of the Emperor's New Clothes, where it's essentially a really, really egotistical, full of himself emperor is scammed by a couple of sharps that pretend that this super, super, super brilliant, expensive clothing is visible to really intelligent, or visible to really intelligent people, but invisible for others. Long story short, basically the guy gets scammed by a bunch of people that aren't actually creating anything, but he's too big to admit it. He's too puffed up to admit the shortcomings of what he's done. It ends up being just a dramatic and embarrassing collapse. And I've always felt like that story matched a lot of what went up with Overwatch League, where it was basically puffed up and bloated beyond what it had really earned. And by how do you earn an esport? How does an esport earn? Well, it earns by being a game that people enjoy and can follow easily. It earns it through the profitability of the esport and the esport structure. And I feel like, regardless, this is old news really, but Overwatch League was never that. It was always pumped up way beyond its capabilities. An analogy would be to think if, let's say that you were to create your own little neighborhood Overwatch tournament within just all the buddies that you have in the neighborhood, and that grew to their buddies and their friends and their buddies, and then you hire an organizer, and that you end up running this pretty big cross-state or cross-country tournament that just started really small, but then all of a sudden you get a message from the United States government and they want to buy you out for several $1 trillion, and they're going to have a bunch of city localized positions and doing all this and that, but the game isn't balanced yet. They don't even know if the franchise model is going to work yet. And then obviously during the course of that, there's a lot of bad communication. Basically, it's just rushed. It's just a huge, big franchise model that comes storming down the door, but the game hadn't really earned the size. It hadn't grown organically to that position. And what ended up basically coming out is a lot of forced corporate direction that just didn't make sense. The game wasn't profitable enough in that position, and a lot of other stuff went along that way. The game was new. Localized franchising just never really worked, especially in the esport environment. Even back when there were still LANs, frequent LANs. I mean, what was it? Every single Overwatch League game in Season 1 was at a LAN, but it's all in the same location, so it didn't matter if you were a LA Gladiators fan. Okay, well, you're good, but what if you're a Dallas Fuel fan? What are you gonna do? Fly to LA? And I think there were some attempts to address some of that, but ultimately COVID shut that one down. Overall, esports and general monetization, this has been something that people smarter than I have talked about. There's just not a lot of money to be made in esports. People don't buy jerseys all that much. Most of the monetization in sports comes from tickets and from vendors at those locations. So you end up finding out, like, well, how do we actually make money doing this? And I think that's where esports has really, really failed. So when you go for this massive franchising model, that question just was never answered. In fact, the fact that it wasn't answered just meant that the franchise model was bleeding money even faster than other esports were. Not to mention a lot of unpopular moves. The move to YouTube, which ultimately made them money, but money is such a short-sighted way of looking at things. Yes, it kept Overwatch League in business, but it also meant that people didn't want to watch it. And you're not going to be able to stay in business long-term if people don't want to watch it. Now, you can argue about whether the move was good long-term or not, but ultimately, if you're making moves that are just basically to keep the league afloat, but not actually organic, like that's the problem, though, is when you have this too big to fail kind of a position, you have to make moves to keep afloat, to pay the bills. You don't make moves that are popular that will, over time, pay the bills. You don't have any of that leeway. GOATS was a disaster. A lot of player burnout with the way the season was structured, with the way the travel structure, with too many games, too long of an off season, the way that the patches were structured. Really, one of the big ones is obviously the death of Overwatch 1, which went into Overwatch 2, which ultimately ended up not really working out either. With communication issues between patches, poor tournament, poor matchmaking within strengths of schedule, the replay viewer disaster. Really just terrible professional balancing, starting with even before GOATs, starting with the Mercy/Moth meta, all the way up until recently. Slow, sluggish. I mean, even recently, like think about like what Owl's happening right now. We have another Winston Sombra Tracer meta because we've had 2, 3, whatever, how many patches from A to B, and none of them actually made any significant impact at all, and everybody could see that coming, and yet here we are. Tournament structure, patch timing, all that kind of stuff. So it's like so many things that really tore it down, and many of those things were exacerbated or specifically unique to that Blizzard controlling things, the whole franchise model. So here's what happened. Basically, I'll pull the article up here, but basically the Overwatch League negotiated, has met with the teams, and is offering them, if we're able to amend our terms during the off season, we will basically give you $6 million. These teams are owing to the league, to Blizzard, a lot of money. So even just $6 million is a lot of money. It's basically saying, hey, if we can just cut our losses here, we'll give you $6 million back. And these teams are already losing money as it is. So any gesture like that is a big deal, and it really shows that Microsoft wants out. They don't want to be bleeding any more money. And I think this is almost certainly going to be something that all these teams are going to be acting on. There's a lot of upset people over the direction and management of OWL within the franchising system. Obviously, it's not at all been like they were promised or how things were supposed to work out. A lot of reasons why that, and they want out. So interesting to note as well in this article that Sean Miller is very adamant about the future of Overwatch 2 Esports, adamant that there is a future, that we're going to be working to that. And I think that's where I want to pivot just a little bit about the rest of this video. Like, what is the future of Overwatch 2 Esports? So generally, we know that esports are kind of cooling off a little bit. There's a lot of reasons about that. Again, there's going to be a lot more videos with people that are a lot more educated on that than I am. I'm a little bit more Overwatch unique, but generally esports are cooling off. So the thing that we have to kind of understand, though, is that nobody wants Overwatch League to die, but we've also been at the position, even as going as far back as 3, maybe even 4 years ago, where the number of decisions were made, and even just you can even see the writing on the wall. I didn't understand enough about the model at the time, but I know a lot of people that were more educated about it probably can say even from its inception it was a flawed concept. It hadn't really been earned. So basically, the band-aid has to be ripped off. This, at least as of in the last few years, was just not gonna work. So are we celebrating that Overwatch League is dying? No, but it had to happen sooner rather than later, and better sooner than later. Bad decisions in a balanced capitalistic environment, they need to die off for the betterment to live on. There needs to be a growth period. Now that means growing pains and pain, but you can't have a bad system, a bad structure continue to struggle and survive and be artificially pumped up. It doesn't work very well, really in any environment at all. So the question is will there be a regrowth? Well, there's no real guarantee of that. We can say this is a good thing, this is a bad thing. The thing is we don't really know. It's objectively not a bad thing because it was inevitable. It would essentially be animating a corpse, and has been for some time. But it really depends on the quality of the future models. It depends on the leadership of where Overwatch 2 Esports goes on beyond Overwatch League, within Blizzard and hopefully outside of Blizzard. Blizzard's shown that they're not capable of running a league to this scale. Could that be something that they're able to do on a smaller scale? I personally don't trust them, but it's possible. Will they be opening up third-party sponsorships? What is the future of collegiate? And a lot more questions that really remain to be asked and answered. Overall, the league was really unstable and stressful for players as well. So as a personal bit of a touch here, as somebody who's coached and led within the scene, I think even in a very individualistic player standpoint, this is a good thing. I think losing out on money sucks. Losing your job sucks. But especially knowing the status that a lot of these players were training in and living in, whether it was mental health, education, the league was really not even a neutral step, but a step back in terms of their own personal progress. It would be different if a lot of these players were exclusively saving the money that they had for future like college endeavors. But honestly, the more I spend time in the league, just outside the league, I guess, and working with these guys, I think that the sooner they get kicked into college or finding other avenues, the better, right? Even worst case scenario, if Overwatch 2 Esports dies, people get kicked into college. Okay, fine. Like the Overwatch League was just honestly overall mostly a negative experience for people that spent time in it. Has some of the most really some of the highest turnover that I think is really out there in any esport, and esports turnover is even higher than it is in real sports. So No guarantee that's going to change in Overwatch 2, but Overwatch League certainly didn't help it. But again, worst case scenario, even if it's collegiate, it's going to be a positive move for a lot of players. So do we celebrate the death? No. I don't know exactly what. I celebrate the death of a truly negative look for esports in Overwatch 2, but I don't know that I celebrate the death of Overwatch League just because. I think it's objectively a good thing, but I think maybe we celebrate the death of Overwatch League with the hopes that the grass is greener on the other side. Obviously, I'm not bitter enough to say if there's no Overwatch 2 esports, I don't want anything. I don't think anybody says that. But I think you have to cut off the dead weight, and Overwatch League has been dead weight to the scene. It's been a bad look to the game for such a long time. So let me know what you think in the comments. What do you guys think is going to happen? Nobody really knows. I certainly don't know. I may be a little bit qualified, but even I feel remarkably uneducated on so many aspects of decisions like these. So really, it just remains to be seen. Let me know if you think in the comments. I'll chat with you guys later, and let's see what happens.